It was meant to be a night of warmth, of light, of peace. Instead, it ended in silence so heavy it swallowed an entire home. Christmas doesn't usually arrive quietly. It announces itself with music, with laughter, with the soft chaos of family gathered too close. But on that December morning, the house on the quiet street felt hollow, still, like time itself had stopped breathing. Lucy Clews believed in Christmas, not just the holiday, but what it represented: togetherness, forgiveness. The promise that no matter how difficult the year had been, there was still room for hope. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, who checked in on friends even when she was tired herself. A devoted wife, a loving mother, a woman people trusted without hesitation. From the outside, her life looked complete. Her home glowed softly in the evenings. Fairy lights framed the windows. A wreath hung perfectly centered on the front door. Inside, presents sat patiently beneath the tree, wrapped with care, waiting for hands that would never open them. Neighbors passed by, smiling, assuming what everyone assumes when things look normal, that everything is fine. But homes don't tell the truth from the outside. Behind that front door, something was shifting, something quiet, something dangerous. In the days leading up to Christmas, Lucy had changed, not dramatically, not enough to set off alarms, just enough to leave a feeling behind. Friends would later describe it in fragments: a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a pause before answering simple questions, a faraway look as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. She didn't say she was afraid. She didn't say she was in danger. She kept moving forward, doing what so many people do when life feels heavy, hoping the feeling would pass. After all, who expects violence during Christmas week? Who imagines betrayal in the place they sleep? Danger doesn't look dangerous when it shares your last name. The house stayed quiet, too quiet. Then came the morning that changed everything. Cold air hung low over the street as police cars arrived, their lights cutting through the early hours like a warning no one had heard in time. Neighbors peeked through curtains, doors cracked open. Whispers traveled faster than facts. Officers stepped inside the Clews' home and into a scene that felt wrong in the most unsettling way. Decorations were still in place. The tree stood tall, lights unlit. Food sat half-prepared as if someone had been interrupted mid-thought. Nothing appeared disturbed, no broken glass, no overturned furniture, just the eerie stillness of a life that had stopped without explanation. And then they found Lucy. She was gone. The words feel small compared to the weight they carry. Lucy Clews was dead, inside her own home, days before Christmas. Shock moved outward like a wave. Family members collapsed into disbelief. Friends searched their memories for signs they might have missed. A community that had felt safe suddenly realized how thin that safety really was. And there, standing in the center of it all, was her husband. He appeared calm, composed, a man wrapped in grief, speaking softly, eyes heavy, voice steady. He answered questions. He accepted condolences. He looked like a man whose world had ended overnight. To many, he was the victim, the surviving spouse, the widow, but grief can be convincing. And appearances have a way of lying. At first, nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate explanation, no clear enemy lurking in the shadows, just a woman dead where she should have been safest. Police searched for answers in the obvious places: a break-in gone wrong, an accident, a medical emergency, but the facts didn't settle. They hovered, uncomfortable, unresolved. The house told a story, but it wasn't speaking clearly yet. As investigators worked, they noticed what wasn't there: no chaos, no frantic attempt to save her, no panic frozen into the walls. Instead, there was order, calm, almost control, and control leaves fingerprints. People began to replay their last conversations with Lucy. Her silences felt louder now, her distant smiles heavier. The things she hadn't said pressed harder than anything she had. Still, no one wanted to imagine the truth. Because the truth, when it finally arrives, rarely comes gently. The idea that someone close to Lucy could have harmed her felt unthinkable. But true crime stories don't begin with strangers. They begin with trust, with routines, with relationships that look ordinary until they are. As Christmas Day approached, the house remained dark. No laughter, no music, just evidence, bags, and unanswered questions. The tree stood like a monument to what should have been, what would never be. Lucy Clews would never wake up on Christmas morning. She would never see the gifts opened, never hear the familiar sounds she had worked so hard to protect. And somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the shock, beneath the carefully presented sorrow, something else waited. A truth, a betrayal, a story far darker than anyone was ready to face. Because sometimes the most chilling crimes don't come with screams or broken doors. They arrive quietly, wrapped like a gift, and left beneath the tree, waiting to be uncovered. Grief can look real, sound real, even feel real, but silence tells a different story. In the days after Lucy Clews' death, the house filled with people yet felt emptier than ever. Flowers crowded the doorway, cards stacked on the table. Soft voices moved from room to room, careful not to disturb the stillness that had settled into the walls. The air smelled like candles and sympathy, like endings. Her husband stood among the mourners, shoulders slumped, eyes red, voice calm, too calm. He spoke of Lucy with measured sadness, thanked people for coming, replayed the same words again and again as if repetition might make them true. To most, he looked like a man shattered by loss. Investigators weren't convinced. Police don't chase emotions, they chase gaps, pauses, the moments where stories don't quite line up. And from the beginning, there were moments like that, small, easy to miss, but impossible to ignore once you noticed them. They began by rebuilding Lucy's final days minute by minute. She woke up, who she spoke to, what plans she had made, simple questions at first, ordinary details, the kind that should fall neatly into place. They didn't, timelines shifted, times changed. A conversation remembered one way then another, nothing dramatic, just enough to make the truth wobble. The house itself added to the unease. No signs of forced entry, no chaos, no desperate struggle frozen into the furniture. Yet Lucy's injuries told a story that didn't match the calm scene around her. Violence without disorder is rarely accidental. As the investigation continued, voices that had once stayed quiet began to rise, friends, acquaintances, people who had sensed something but never named it. Lucy, they said, hadn't been herself for a while. She smiled, yes, she showed up, but something behind her eyes had dimmed. Her marriage, once warm and open, had grown tight, controlled. Arguments were kept private, disagreements smoothed over in public. What looked like concern sometimes felt like supervision. What sounded like love sometimes felt like pressure. These weren't explosive fights. They were subtle, lingering, the kind that don't leave marks but leave scars all the same. Then there was money. Financial stress has a way of amplifying everything it touches: bills, debts, plans that no longer seemed possible. The future felt smaller than it once had. Christmas wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a deadline, another expectation to meet, another performance to maintain. Behind closed doors, pressure builds quietly. Investigators began to look harder at the man who had lost his wife. His statements were polite, precise, almost rehearsed. He remembered some details vividly, others not at all. He showed grief but not urgency, sadness but not confusion. When questioned about the timeline, his answers shifted just enough to leave room for doubt. None of it was proof, but together it was something else. Patterns. Patterns don't scream, they whisper, they repeat. They form shapes you can't ignore once they appear. The more detectives listened, the more the same themes surfaced: control, tension, silence, a relationship that looked stable but felt fragile underneath. Lucy's death was no longer just a tragedy, it was a question, and questions demand answers. As interviews continued, cracks widened. Statements contradicted earlier versions. Emotional reactions didn't match the gravity of certain moments. The image of the grieving husband began to blur, replaced by something harder to define, something colder. This wasn't the story of a random crime. It wasn't fate. It wasn't bad luck arriving at the worst possible time. This was personal. Somewhere in that house, behind those carefully placed decorations, the truth had been hiding in plain sight. And the closer investigators came, the heavier the silence became. Because silence, when pressed, breaks. Lucy Clews had lived quietly in her final days, carrying worries she never shared, trusting a life that was already slipping away from her. Now in death she was finally being heard, through evidence, through inconsistencies, through the things people wished they had asked sooner. And as Christmas passed without her, one truth began to settle in the room like a shadow that wouldn't lift. Whatever happened to Lucy Clews did not come from outside, it came from within. And the person who knew exactly how her story ended was still standing in the center of the house, pretending not to know how it began. The truth didn't arrive with sirens or shouting. It arrived quietly, like a breath held too long. For weeks the case had circled the same questions, the same doubts, the same uneasy feeling that something didn't fit. Investigators had learned to trust that feeling. It was the sound beneath the noise, the whisper behind the words, and now finally it was getting louder. The turning point came from something small, almost forgettable, a detail buried in reports, a sentence that hadn't mattered before. Until it did, forensics took another look at Lucy's injuries, not with sympathy, not with assumption, but with precision, cold, exact, and what they found stripped away every remaining excuse. The marks on her body told a story that accidents don't tell. The timing didn't match a fall. The force didn't match misfortune. This wasn't chance. This was violence. Once that door opened, it couldn't be closed again. Every statement was pulled back into the light. Every timeline measured against reality instead of emotion. And slowly, the husband's version of events began to collapse. His movements didn't line up. The gaps between moments stretched wider than memory could explain. When questioned again, his answers changed, just slightly, but enough. Calm turned into irritation, confidence into defensiveness, grief into something sharper, something afraid. What once sounded like sorrow now felt practiced. Police interviews grew longer, the room colder. Questions slowed down, not to rush him but to let silence do the work. Silence has weight, it presses, it exposes, and as the pauses grew longer, so did the tension. Eyes locked, hands clenched, breathing shallow, the mask was slipping. Investigators laid the facts out carefully, not accusations, truths, forensic findings, contradictions, timelines that no longer allowed room for lies. With every piece his posture changed. The calm expression fractured. The man who had stood so composed at memorials now struggled to hold himself together, because lies require energy, and he was running out. Then came the moment every investigator waits for, the shift, the realization that passes across a face before words ever do, a look that says the game is over even if the mouth keeps denying it. The widow wasn't grieving, he was calculating. Lucy had trusted him completely, trusted the man she shared a bed with, a home with, a future with. She had believed that whatever problems existed could be fixed, softened, survived. She believed love meant safety. That belief cost her everything. As the evidence stacked higher, there was nowhere left to hide. The story he had built so carefully began to crumble under its own weight. What had once looked like controlled sorrow now appeared cold, strategic, manufactured. When officers finally moved in, the arrest was quiet. No shouting, no dramatic escape. Just handcuffs clicking into place and a life unraveling in seconds. News traveled fast. The community reeled. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the image they had known with the truth now staring back at them. The grieving husband, the quiet man, the one who stood under Christmas lights accepting sympathy. Gone, in his place stood a murderer. The realization cut deep, not just because Lucy was gone, but because the danger had been so close. Because evil hadn't broken in from the outside. It had lived inside the home, smiled at the table, slept beside her at night. Lucy Clews didn't die in confusion or mystery. She died because someone believed he could control her, control the narrative, control the truth. He believed silence would protect him, that love would cover his tracks, that grief would shield his lies. For a while it almost worked, but truth doesn't stay buried forever. It pushes up through cracks, through inconsistencies, through the quiet determination of people who refuse to stop asking questions. As he was led away, the house stood behind him, still decorated, still pretending nothing had changed, but everything had. Lucy's story was no longer his to shape, it belonged to the truth now. And though justice was beginning to take form, something remained unresolved, a question that would never be answered, a moment frozen in time. Did Lucy know in her final moments that the person she trusted most had already chosen betrayal? That question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, and it followed everyone who had ever believed that love alone could protect them from the darkest truths hiding behind closed doors. The room fell silent the moment Lucy's name was spoken. Not a single breath dared to interrupt it. Even the walls seemed to listen. The courtroom was filled, yet it felt empty. Empty in the way places do when someone irreplaceable is missing. Lucy Clews should have been there. She should have been sitting beside her family, alive, watching justice unfold. Instead, she existed only in photographs now. Images projected onto a screen, smiling, warm, unaware that every picture was a reminder of a life taken too soon. The trial peeled back the layers one by one. Testimony echoed through the room, steady and unforgiving. Investigators spoke of timelines, forensics spoke of force. Friends spoke of changes they hadn't understood at the time. Every word stripped away another illusion. The happy marriage, the quiet home, the grieving husband. Behind closed doors, the truth had been very different. Control replaced care. Silence replaced safety. Love became something sharp and conditional. The courtroom heard about manipulation disguised as concern, about tension hidden beneath polite smiles, about a woman who carried fear quietly because she believed endurance was the same as strength. Lucy had lived inside a story no one else could see. Her husband sat at the defense table unmoving, no tears, no trembling hands, no performance left to give. The grief he once displayed had vanished, replaced by a hollow stillness. He stared forward, eyes fixed, as if refusing to meet the weight of what he had done. The evidence didn't ask for belief, it demanded acceptance. Every contradiction was laid bare, every lie exposed. The truth no longer whispered, it stood tall, undeniable, and impossible to outrun. When the verdict came, it arrived without drama, no gasps, no cries, just a quiet confirmation of what had already settled deep in everyone's chest. Guilty, justice had spoken. But justice did not bring relief, it never does. Lucy did not walk back through the doors, her laughter did not return to the rooms she once filled. Her children did not get their mother back. The verdict could punish a man, but it could not repair what had been broken beyond measure. Christmas would come again year after year. Lights would hang, trees would be decorated, songs would play. But for Lucy's family, the season would always carry an ache beneath the surface. A reminder of the morning when everything stopped. Lost leaves echoes, the courtroom slowly emptied, chairs scraped softly against the floor, people whispered, unsure what volume was appropriate after something so final. Outside, life continued as it always does. Cars passed, phones rang, the world moved forward without waiting for those left behind. Lucy's story, however, did not end there. It followed the people who heard it. It stayed with them in quiet moments, in arguments that felt too tense, in relationships that demanded silence instead of trust. It became a warning whispered between friends, a thought that lingered just a little longer than comfort allows, because danger doesn't always arrive with violence first. Sometimes it arrives with flowers, with apologies, with promises to change. Sometimes it looks like love. Lucy Clews trusted the person closest to her. She trusted that familiarity meant safety. That commitment meant protection. That enduring discomfort was part of being loyal. She did what so many do. She stayed quiet. She hoped. She believed things would get better. Her silence was not weakness, but it was used against her. Now her voice speaks in another way, through court records, through documentaries, through stories told so others might recognize the signs sooner, so they might ask the questions Lucy never did, so they might leave before silence turns deadly. Her last Christmas was stolen, taken not by a stranger, not by chance, but by betrayal wrapped in intimacy. The quietest homes can hide the darkest crimes, and the most dangerous people are often the ones who know us best. The truth did find its way out, it always does, but it came too late for Lucy, and that is the part that never settles, the part that stays unresolved. Because somewhere between love and fear, between trust and control, a line was crossed, and once crossed there was no turning back. Lucy Clews' story ends with justice. But it also ends with a question that lingers long after the courtroom lights go out. How many others are still living inside that silence, waiting for someone to notice before it's too late?